And I'm one of those weird authors where every author sort of gets their ideas from different places. And for me, I get my ideas from maps. You show me a map and the map is instantly full of stories for me. Like, why do people settle here? What's their main thing that they do? Is it timber? Cool. They're gonna have a logging industry. Where do they take the timber? Well, they'll probably float it down the river, and there's the port, so they'll be using all this timber that these guys are floating down the river at the port, possibly build ships. You have a shipbuilding industry. And now you're going to have like a group of laborers who possibly feel that they're not getting much value from these wealthy merchants, and you have conflict and there's a story, So I always see stories in maps, and like Tolkien with all of his maps, I saw so many stories in the maps of Middle Earth, and I would actually recreate them. I would actually I would take a map out of a book, and I would trace it, and then I would make a larger version and a larger version. I made a 10-foot wide map of Middle Earth at one point when I was like 12 years old, and so and that just always made stories for me. But once I sort of learned about what was out there in space and found like this cool space mapping software that people have used for all sorts of things, then boom, I was like, this is infinite stories, and that shifted me. I always wrote fantasy, and that just shifted me once I realized that, and boom, I was a sci-fi writer, and I wrote over 100 sci-fi books as a result.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 437 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode, I have an interview with Malorie Cooper. Malorie Cooper is a science fiction author and creator of the Aeon 14 universe under the name M.D. Cooper, who has written over 100 books and plans on writing at least 100 more. Along with her wife, Jill, Mal also runs The Writing Wives, which helps dozens of authors a month reach their marketing goals. Now, I spent a wonderful afternoon with Malorie back in June of 2025 when I was in New Brunswick, and we had an absolute blast, nerding out about history, science fiction, and, interestingly enough, maps, and how maps have inspired so much of Mal's writing. And that's when I realized two important things. While I had interviewed Malorie several times for my podcast, episode 195, back in June 2021, and I completely forgot that I actually had Mal on my podcast. I thought I had Mal on the Kobo Writing Life podcast. But anyways, even though I'd interviewed Mal several times on my own podcast as well as other industry platforms, most of those times we talked about the business of writing, and we talked about the Writing Wives and Facebook ads. Well, I wanted to have Mal on the podcast for a discussion about these really fun, nerdy things that we were just for hours chatting about. So shortly after I returned home, I booked Mal in for an in-depth chat about the passions that drive much of her fiction. And that's coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by ManuscriptReport.com. I'm sure you've heard me and countless others say it before. Writing the book is only half the journey. Getting it into readers' hands, the right readers' hands, is where the real challenge begins. And that's where Manuscript Report comes in. Now, ManuscriptReport.com is a tool built for authors who don't want to guess their way through promotion. In about 10 minutes, Manuscript Report will transform your manuscript into a full-stack marketing roadmap. You simply upload your manuscript, and within minutes, you get a full marketing roadmap, complete with reader profiles, comparable titles, SEO keywords, blurb suggestions, and even ready to post social content. And it's based on your actual book and its content, not some generic template. It's a fantastic tool for authors who want to take the guesswork out of promotion and start focusing on strategy. You can check it out at manuscriptreport.com, and if you use the code MARK5, MARK, the number 5, you'll save $5 off your first report. That's manuscriptreport.com, helping you turn your manuscript into momentum. That's it for the ad read. I'm going to forego comments for this week's episode, as well as keep my personal update very brief. October is an insanely busy time, and I have had such an insane summer that I have such a backlog of great interviews. I've finally dipped into the past, and I'm slowly making my way through these amazing interviews, and I realized, last episode was, I think, something I did earlier in the spring, and then this one I did in early June of 2025, and I realized I have so many episodes or interviews I've done over the summer that I haven't gotten to. So on top of this one, I did an additional interview with Malorie. It's going to be in a bonus extra episode. Not a bonus episode, it's going to be the next episode in the series, but it'll be coming out between this Friday or this week's release and next week's release, because it's a great interview and I want to get it in there. But so much going on. October is always busy for me because of the kind of spooky things I write. I've got so many events going on, so many places to be, so many presentations to put together. It is, I love being busy, by the way, but I also feel like I have such a backlog of work to get done. So to that end, and particularly because this episode is being done at the very last minute, like most of them, I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm going to play that bumper, the hopefully softer, less startling bumper lately in the last several episodes, thanks to listener feedback. But more importantly, after that bumper, you get to hear this conversation that I had with Malorie Cooper back in early June. And yes, coming up in this interview, I do accidentally say or assumed I hadn't had Mal on my podcast. I thought I had interviewed Mal for Kobo, but I did actually interview Mal in 2021, and so that was an error on my part in that conversation. But the whole rest of the conversation, particularly these insights into Malorie's writing and passion for history and science and the maps as well, I loved hearing about that, and you're going to get to love hearing about that right now. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to roll the bumper, and we're going to get into this interview. Hi, Malorie. Welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark.
It is so great to see you again, even though I just saw you about a week or so ago in Fredericton, which was fantastic. I kind of saw you on Canadian ground. I normally would see you at various conferences, mostly, I think, at Vegas or NINC or places like that over the years, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And this time it was at the New Brunswick Writers Federation conference. What was it called? WordSpring.
Yes.
WordSpring as well. So it was awesome. We spent an afternoon at the bar, just gabbing and getting caught up and talking about. So here's the thing. I often know of you as the author of The Writing Wives, who works with her wife and help other writers. And a lot of the presentations I've seen you do are about, Facebook ads and optimizing all of that. But I had this wonderful experience as you were sharing some of the Aeon novels and some of the science fiction writing. And you were so passionate about it. I thought, I bet you Mal rarely gets a chance to talk about that aspect of writing. Is that true?
It's true. Yeah, I can nerd out pretty hard about the sci-fi, the books I write and the science in them, and how learning about science and the universe we live in actually, for me, just spawns stories like crazy. So, yeah, most people want to know how can I help them run better ads and sell more books, which I love doing, but I also love nerding out about cool stuff.
Well, I'm looking forward to nerding out with you. And again, I realized I had never had you on the Stark Reflections podcast, so we had to fix that.
Totally. I'm glad we got to do it so quickly too.
So let's get that service aspect. Let's get that out of the way for any listeners curious. Okay. So what are the Writing Wives?
So my wife and I have been helping authors with Facebook ads since probably late 2018, early 2019, in sort of a consulting fashion. But even before that, I wrote a book called Help My Facebook Ads Suck, because I was constantly like online in Facebook groups and authors were saying Facebook ads don't work. And this goes back to the very beginning of Facebook ads, even. And I had made a lot of money and sold a lot of books with via Facebook ads. So I'm like, they do work actually, and here's how to make them work for you. And it's over the years has turned into an entire separate career from writing.
Wow, that's amazing. So anyone who is interested in how to make their Facebook ads work, where can they find that, or what's a resource that you've posted that you might recommend?
Sure. They can go to thewritingwives.com. So thewritingwives.com. And you can sign up for, we use a platform called School. And we basically everything that we know, everything that's in our brains is available for $37 a month. We are always having live meetings with people. Like we're doing Q&As, we're doing webinars. We have ongoing classes all the time. And it's our way of just getting as much information into authors' hands as we possibly can for not a lot of money.
Oh, thank you. And so, as a bit of a teaser towards the great value that you guys offer there, what's a common misconception that people have? Because, like, like I think I said to you, I'm really good at giving Facebook my money. That's all I've gotten good at.
Yeah.
What's sort of a common misperception that you say, actually, here's a bit of a insight.
I think the thing that the authors sort of hit the most is that they like you, for example, had some ads that worked really well. And from how you described them in your numbers, the ads were actually doing really, really well. And then they kind of petered out and stopped working. And you took that to mean, well, I'm not very good at running ads, so I shouldn't do it anymore. But really, you were actually quite good at running ads. You just didn't really, I mean, you probably intellectually understood this, but maybe not like practically or emotionally understood it. All ads that authors make will eventually fail. Every ad will stop working. And at some point, it'll stop making money and start eating money. And so, really, running ads as an author is really trying to understand where that inflection point is and when you need to be making more ads. And the other thing I think, too, to have two things is that a lot of authors sort of think like they get one ad working, like I have this great Facebook ad, it's making me lots of money, but you shouldn't have one. You need 6 to 10 good ads that are working and making you money. Because then as they all fluctuate a bit and go up and down, you don't, if one ad sort of dips down, you don't lose, all of your income or all of your fresh revenue, that they will actually balance each other out. And as you hone them and tune them, you'll actually see your numbers just keep going up and up and up and up.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Thank you.
Welcome.
That is awesome. So we got to nerd out over science.
Yes.
And as you were talking about things you've learned that inspired, oh, here's this, and that was part of this novel, etc. I want to go back to where did that start for you? Were you a science nerd? Were you like a Dungeons and Dragons nerd? Or like where did this all start for you?
Yeah, I've always been like curious about everything, I've spent way too much time reading like ancient manuscripts that I can get my hands on that have been
Like
translated.
ancient
Um,
manuscripts.
Oh yeah, like stuff like I mean depends I guess on ancient, but things like for example, if you want to learn about the wars that Rome had with Carthage, there are actually Roman historians who wrote about them. So I've read like their works translated, of course. I've read like Marcus Aurelius's
Wow.
books by Roman emperors and all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
Anything to get my hands on because I like to learn. I like to learn about the people and their situations. And that's why I like to learn history, not just dates, but like who were the people, what were they thinking, how were they feeling, and why did they do the things they do. So
Right.
I'll deep dive into that. And I remember being a kid just loving like learning about paleontology and geography and all sorts of things like that. And so I always loved learning about space and I always loved learning about the planets and whatnot. But what we get taught about the universe in school is actually like the time. I mean, it's the universe, it's huge, but even of what we know, we get taught the tiniest fraction. And the more I learned about what was out there in space and what was around, the more interested I became in what could possibly happen. And I'm one of those weird authors where every author sort of gets their ideas from different places. And for me, I get my ideas from maps. You show me a map, and the map is instantly full of stories for me. Like, why do people settle here? What's their main thing that they do? Is it timber? Cool. They're gonna have a logging industry. Where do they take the timber? Well, they'll probably float it down the river, and there's the port, so they'll be using all this timber that these guys are floating down the river at the port, possibly build ships, shipbuilding industry. And now you're going to have like a group of laborers who possibly feel that they're not getting as much value from these wealthy merchants, and you have conflict, and there's a story,
You're
like
right.
you look like you're taking notes, like you're gonna like got some ideas for a new story. I'm just kidding.
I am. Well, I wanted to make some notes of things I wanted to ask based on that.
It's just funny. So I always see stories in maps, and like Tolkien with all of his maps. I saw so many stories in the maps of Middle Earth, and I would actually recreate them. I would like make I would actually do I would take a map out of a book, and I would trace it, and then I would make a larger version and a larger version. I made a 10-foot wide map of Middle Earth at one point when I was like 12
Really?
years old,
Was that like
just because I
taping pieces of paper together to make it
yeah,
bigger
yeah,
as it
yeah. My
goes?
my uncle was an X-ray technician, so I had these big sheets of like hard cardboard that the X-rays were between. So he would just bring all those back home, and I would just like grab them and work them into these massive maps of the. I still actually have some of them, um, and so and that just always made stories for me. But once I sort of learned about what was out there in space, um, and found like this cool space mapping software that people have used for all sorts of things, then boom, I was like, this is infinite stories,
Wow.
and that shifted me. I always wrote fantasy, and that just shifted me once I realized that, and boom, I was a sci-fi writer, and I wrote over 100 sci-fi books as a result.
Did it start with writing fantasy stories though
Oh
before
yeah.
you found the love of sci-fi? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I finished reading Lord of the Rings, and then I went to the library, and I got the Silmarillion, and I got like every random book that Christopher Tolkien ever published or anything like that about his dad's works, and consumed them all. And it wasn't enough, so I just started writing my own like Lord of the Rings fan fiction, basically at that point.
Oh wow. So
Yeah.
so Tolkien was one of those prime introductions into the fantasy world for a lot of people for obvious reasons. Sort of the
Mhm.
grandfather of of that.
Yeah.
Who was it? Mary Shelley that got you into science fiction? Like one of the, or was it like what was it the seminal sort of science fiction a book that you picked up and went, ooh,
Um, it would have been Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern. I started reading that because it looked like fantasy. And, like woman on the book cover had a woman on the back of a dragon riding through the skies.
yeah.
And I got to the book Dragon's Dawn, and I'm like, wait a second. They're colonists on a forgotten colony world. And then I started reading more and more of her stuff. And really, she was the one that sucked me into science fiction. And then I started
Oh.
reading just everything I get my hands on in the sci-fi world as well.
Did you get a chance? I know you've met Todd McCaffrey. I think you have been in the same
Oh yeah.
space.
Yep.
Have you talked to Todd about that?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, I remember I asked him one time, I said, Todd, what's your favorite of your mother's books? And he said, I love all of my mother's books, as any good son should say. And I said, my favorite one is the Kilishandra series. And he's like, those are my least favorite of my mother's books.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it was an amusing way that he phrased it all, just very diplomatic. But he
Oh man.
had to call. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Fantastic. I didn't know who he was the first time I met him. Like, who's that nice guy? He's like, oh, that's Anne McCaffrey's son. I'm like, oh wow, cool, Todd.
Yeah.
Because I knew who he was, but I
Yeah.
didn't know what he looked like back in the day.
Totally.
So I do two things. I'm really fascinated by how you look at maps, and maps can inspire things. Then maybe this is going to be a two-tiered question. Can a map inform science fiction in the same way that it might inspire fantasy?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that was really like a seminal moment for me was when I realized that habitable planets like Earth are going to eventually become an afterthought in space exploration. Um, Whenever you watch things like Star Trek or Star Wars, they're always flying to some world with lakes and trees and rivers and oceans and settling down and doing stuff. But that is honestly kind of ridiculous. Um, Planets like that got a big gravity well. It takes a lot of energy to get back up off the planet. So it's not like a really effective place to do things. You've got it's a toxic atmosphere. Oxygen is rusting everything. Slowly everything on Earth is burning because of oxygen. It's not a great place to actually build a bunch of stuff. Plus, we've got weather and wind. Every square corner we make, the world wants to round it or just knock it down or something like that. Whereas you could take something like you build a ring around Earth at Earth's geosynchronous orbital point, and you make it 100 miles wide. It will have more habitable space than Earth. Then you make it 100 levels deep. Now you have something with 100 times the habitable space of Earth. Make it 1,000 miles wide. Now you have something that's 1,000 times. It
And
has
that's
more
not
space on
very
Earth.
wide when you, in the grand scheme
It's
of the
really
size of the
not.
planet. Yeah.
No, not
Wow.
at all. And the Earth's moon has enough material in it to do that thousands of times, to make a ring that big thousands of times.
Wow.
So you start thinking about like what's possible, or like for example, I think we talked about this about how Mercury is actually the core of a much larger planet, where the rest of the planet got knocked off or possibly sucked in by the sun or who knows what. So Mercury is just an iron ball floating in space. Um, with some other elements in the mix, obviously, you could build 150,000 Death Stars with the material that of Mercury.
Wow.
So people really, even though like we're like, oh, it's just this tiny little planet smaller than our moon, we don't realize how much stuff you could build with it or how big it really is. If you
Right.
take like our moon, for example, it is the largest solid mass in the solar system, because you're thinking like, okay, we want to build stuff that lasts. You want to protect yourself from radiation and random asteroid meteor impacts and stuff like that. So you want to build things underground on another moon. Well, a lot of the moons like Ganymede or Europa around Jupiter, they're mostly ice and stuff like that. But Luna is made of the exact same things as Earth is. It has like the same percentages of uranium that Earth has, same percentages of gold that Earth has, and so on. Um, its surface is oxygen, just like Earth, because half of most Earth's surface is mostly silica oxide. So you can actually extract oxygen directly out of the moon's surface, just like you could on Earth if you had any need to do so.
Wow.
If you want to make like chip processing, processors, it has more available high grade silica oxide than Earth does for making computer processors. So all sorts of reasons why the moon's pretty awesome, but it's also the largest solid mass in the solar system. Even Earth's crust, the solid, not too hot parts of the Earth's crust are like only about half as much space as the moon is.
Wow.
So you could actually fit, if you were to, like honeycomb the moon, you could put trillions of humans in it.
Wow.
It's got like an unimaginable amount of space in it. So I started thinking about like, where would we live? What would we do? Where are the resources? Where are the resources that are easy to get? It's not on Earth. Earth is like hard to get resources. Water wants to fill all the holes you dig. And if you dig down too far, lava bursts out and tries to melt you, and stuff like that. And then there's earthquakes and there's storms, out in space, you have very little of that to worry about. And you have things like Eros, was it 203 or something like that? It's an asteroid in a orbit around Mars. It has more gold on it than Earth has. So you need gold for making, for manufacturing circuit boards and stuff like that, which we use gold for a lot. Well, there's an entire asteroid made out of it, you know.
Uh, I'm fascinated that you look at a map and you see, oh, what do they manufacture here? And you extrapolate all
Yeah.
things about the society, but you've done that for the universe. But
Mhm.
so how, considering all that you know about the moon, how many of your novels have actually adapted some of that? Because as you were saying this, I was thinking, well, why haven't we, if these resources are there, and it may be once you finally get yourself out of our gravity and into the onto the moon, why aren't we taking advantage of mining there instead of destroying our
It
planet?
sure would make sense, wouldn't it, to actually do all this on the moon? Because the great thing about the moon, too, if you want to get stuff from the moon to the Earth, you just give it a good shove and it will come down to Earth. Or, for example, there's helium-3, which is a natural isotope that streams out from the sun. It is the most valuable resource in existence because once we nail cold fusion, helium-3 is what we're going to want to use for cold fusion. It streams from the sun. We can't get it on Earth because our atmosphere mixes it up and it falls to the bottom of the ocean. But it pools on the north and south poles of the moon like snow. And if we were like say running the shuttle still, 3 shuttle loads of helium-3 a year would supply the United States' entire energy demands for a year.
Oh my God.
It's basically once we get there and we get things like that, kind of like helium-3 and whatnot, we move into energy or a post-scarcity society for energy.
Oh wow.
Which is kind of terrifying because how do we function as a post-scarcity society? Where
Yeah.
where no longer do we have needs that then cost labor and money to fulfill. It's like we have more of everything than we could possibly ever need. What does society look like? Which is also a really fun thing to write about because you're like, okay, once we can access all of this stuff, what does it do to the humans, who
Yeah.
are using these things? How do we how do we find meaning if we don't need to struggle for meaning? Because right now, human meaning is all around struggle. You
Yeah.
know, every single one of us, we have to work to live. And And what if no one had to work to live? What does that do? You know, all sorts of things like that I like to tackle in the stories.
I love the way that writer brain works.
Yeah, you can't stop it.
Can you walk me through a bit of the process for like pick one of your novels or series and
Mhm.
say it was based upon this premise? I think we talked about this a little bit. I was mentioning Rob Sawyer's essay in the recent Writers of the Future that said if you ain't got a theme, then you ain't got a thing.
Yeah,
And you jumped on that and went, yes, and here's why. Was there like a science or something you read about and were just so fascinated that that kicked off you speculating about the people and how they would deal with this, and then suddenly your story came out?
I think the biggest thing was that once I realized how big space is, and everybody sort of has this idea in their head, like, oh, I know how big space is. But like not only how big it is, but how much stuff there is. There are 200 planets in our solar system. Most of them are very small, and we haven't actually discovered the majority of them yet, but we're pretty sure there's about 200 based on how many we have found. Right now, there's 13, with a few more candidates ready to be signed up. There's 8 major planets, and then there's a whole whack of minor planets or dwarf planets, as they're called. So I learned about that, and then I was like researching star charts and looking at like what stars are habitable that we could live near, because most stars actually would be very unfriendly to live around. We want to find stars that are chill, like our star is. And so I mapped out like how humans would expand through space if they travel to the and terraform the best stars to do so at. So I did a lot of that stuff, and I realized that everybody tells science fiction wrong. I'm sorry, everybody else who tells science fiction, but they're too small. Everybody else's scope is thousands of orders of magnitude too small. There are 10 million stars within 1,000 light years of Earth, and that's less than 1% of the galaxy. You know, like there are so many stars, so many places, so many things that and humans would only take 50,000 years to fill the galaxy end to end if we actually like really worked at it and cooked. Maybe it takes us 100,000 years, but at that point you'd have humans around 400 billion stars. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of wild to think about. So I was doing that, and at the same time I'm a history buff, so I'm always reading history, and I was reading about the US's naval buildup at the beginning of at the US's beginning of World War II.
Right.
And you know, D-Day happens. U.S. fleets have been decimated in at Pearl Harbor to a certain extent, and then you know there've been a war of attrition going on in the Atlantic. And what was it? 6 months after Pearl Harbor, give or take a bit, the largest fleet of ships that humanity had ever produced sailed across the English Channel. Now, the United States was not did a lot of that, but a lot of it was the UK. But then 6 months later, an even larger fleet that was almost entirely just a US fleet is put out in the Pacific Ocean and begins the Pacific Theater. Like, how did the United States go from like, crap, we don't have that many ships, and most of them just got blowed up, to making the largest fleet ever 1.5 times in the span of a year? And I was like researching things like there's things like the was it the Grand Rapids Dam or something like that? It's in Western Washington State. It's a massive hydroelectric dam that they built during the Great Recession. If they hadn't made that dam, they actually wouldn't have been able to make as many ships, because that provided the electricity to manufacture the steel and aluminum to make a lot of the ships that they did. You know, so it was learning about all these sorts of things, and I realized, wow, if you were in space and you had access to all of the resources that I just talked about, you could build a fleet of 100,000 ships in 10 years, and you could do it all with robots. You know,
Wow.
so you think about that, you think about like the fleets that you'd see fighting in space, you'd have million ship battles that would be almost unimaginable. I actually had to scale back, because I extrapolated like, okay, you have this much resources, this much population growth,
Right.
what would you actually make? And it was staggering. You know, so I scaled back to like some of the bigger places where humans lived only had 3 or 4 trillion people on them, and that was scaling it back from the actual using population growth from the actual systems I had. I'm like, okay, thank God people every now and then just decide not to have too many kids, as we're seeing on Earth right now. So without that, it would have been just ridiculous. Because also in the future we're going to live longer too.
Yeah.
You know, just so I realized if people lived even like or to a point where they could be fertile for 150 years, you know, you could have an individual person having hundreds of kids,
Yeah.
or 100 kids, you know,
Yeah.
which could be pretty wild. So anyway, it was really about the scale, and I realized that okay, if everybody's like doing like war in space, they're telling what their entire war is really a skirmish for how big an actual war in space would be. So I want to tell effectively World War II in space.
Right.
And that's where my sort of what's my flagship series called the Orion War came from. And
Okay.
one of the books is titled War on a Thousand Fronts because they're actually fighting at one point. And this is actually only a year into the war. They're already fighting on a thousand fronts.
Wow. So that must give you so many options because obviously you're going to narrow in on these characters in this
Mhm.
particular skirmish or situation, right?
Yeah. I do that for like the main series, but I actually spun off entire series that are just about what happened in this one spot. And like so I've got one like relatively minor conflict that occurs. I mean, on the grand scheme of things, a fairly minor conflict in the war, and it took 7 books to tell this
Wow.
story about these people in this conflict.
So it
So, and I
seems like,
I could write books about the Orion War for the rest of my life.
well, that's what I was
As
thinking is you're never going to run out of, you're
Nope.
never
Well,
going
and
to
that was
run
actually
out.
something I wanted to do that because one of the other things that kind of like sparked out, outrage, annoyance in me as an author is you'd read books and the author didn't make a big enough world. And so when the characters defeat the big bad and the author wants a paycheck, suddenly a new big bad appears that no one ever mentioned before. That
Right.
that was, you know, a new part of the map gets drawn, but no one ever said like, hey, maybe we should like go over here or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, there's an entire empire over here that was never in these first 5 books, and now it's the biggest threat ever. It's just like you can only do that so many times or read that so many times before starts getting frustrated. So I want to write a story where the characters are oftentimes talking about battles that are happening all over the place and conflicts and diplomats coming from here or there. I talk about things. So if I ever want to, I can branch out and write any of those stories because I've alluded to all of this content.
How do you, I mean, a couple things is sort of how do you keep track of all that? But then how do you, because when you're telling the 7 book series or this section of that
Mhm.
universe and that story, how do you know when to zoom in and when to zoom back so you can share that, oh, this is just part of this bigger thing. Like this is a village and part of this
Yeah.
giant globe, right?
What I usually do is so sometimes the large scale characters, the higher level sort of managing the galactic war will be talking about resource allocation, and they'll be like, oh well, we just dispatched the 107th fleet to help Rika or something like that, so we can't use it here. And then in Rika's series, they'll be like, okay, this is a pivotal point, and they said we could call on them if we really needed it for this particular engagement, and the 707th fleet shows up, and helps
Right.
them out. So you actually can see it from both sides. The characters may never actually interact, but you'll see sort of these references on both sides to the big picture and then the smaller picture, or the characters like that are down in the dirt fighting some odd battle are like, can we get like air support or anything? They're like, I'm sorry, we are fighting. This fleet is engaged here. This fleet's engaged there. This fleet's engaged over there. You guys are on your own. And rather than just sort of feeling like a plot device, the reader's like, I believe it because in another book series, I was reading about how they actually are engaged in all these different places.
So creating, do you have some sort of Bible that you have to refer
I,
back to?
I do not.
Oh, really? Wow.
No.
Okay.
I
Not even
have
something that fans have created for you, or
My fans have made a few things. They've made like some fanfic websites, and they have a pretty decent number of articles on TV tropes for me. And actually, one fan has actually created a website called readingorder.info that actually has the order to read all of my books in,
oh
and it shows
wow.
like where the storylines are connected and where to go back and forth and stuff like that. And the guy actually that made that also made it for the Honorverse, um, with Honor Harrington. I suddenly forget who wrote that.
David Weber?
David Weber. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, wow.
So it's my series and David Weber's series are the only 2 series on that site. I know it's kind of cool.
Wow. Two different
Um,
guest stars from Superstars writing seminars. There you
yeah, there you go.
go.
But a lot of it's just in my head. I have a pretty good memory, so I can kind of just remember all the bits and pieces, and and I know usually well enough where to go research it in my own books, so that helps too. Also, like every chapter in my books has a date, a location, and like a ship or whatever they're on, so I can actually go and like research my own books pretty easily and be like, okay, at this date, these characters were here and these characters were there.
Oh, that's
But
that's wow. How much outlining do you do for a particular novel?
maybe 10 bullet points or so.
Really? Wow. What
I
about all that research, like all that stuff that you
That's in the 10 bullet points.
Wow. And I guess it's a lot of the reading that you've already done before and the
Yeah.
understanding that you already have. So
Yeah, like
you
I've really
draw upon the
internalized a lot of the
database.
knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the great thing too is like all of the stuff I'm doing, I'm writing hard science fiction that's also like, a future history in a way. So if I'm like, like, oh, what kind of weapon would they use for this? I'm like, well, they would use a proton beam, and here are the properties of proton beam. Here's a website where I can calculate the intensity that I need to do the thing. Like it's
Right.
because so much of it's real science, I can just reference, actual real science to get the details if I need them.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the process because you haven't just written a handful of novels, like 7 books or whatever. You've got how many books now?
100 and it's a fiction. I think it's 123.
123. And when did that start?
So I kicked all this off after actually watching Firefly, the movie, um,
Okay.
and or Serenity, I guess is the name of the movie.
Yeah.
I saw like an early. We actually got to see two pre-releases of the movie in theaters in Boston. Like the first time, it didn't have a soundtrack. It was kind of wild. The lighting
Wow.
wasn't done properly. And I walked out of that and thought, like, I want to write a story about this kind of ship and this kind of crew, but with these changes. And I started doing that. I think I want to say that was back in what, like, '06, '07,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
around there. And what I decided though is I realized I want to make this thing super consistent and super realistic. So I spent 2 years doing research, learning what kind of like weapons would exist, how actually like rocketry really works. Like how like you can't just like have an engine that has a glow coming out the back. You actually have to thrust mass out the back of the ship at a given velocity to move the ship forward. How do you calculate that? As the ship becomes lighter, the thrust actually does more, all sorts of things like that.
Wow.
Like ratios of fuel to actual rest of ship that you would have on different types of ships. And I developed all sorts. I actually developed multiple major engine types that would be used, multiple different weapons types. And as I was like doing all this research, what I realized, another thing is that what most science fiction does is they say, here's the one thing that will change everything. And as I was looking at like all the different ways that people were researching things, materials science, genetics, AI, and even back then I was like really deep into like what they were doing in AI. We're kind of beginning to see the fruits of it now, but there's a lot more that's been studied. I realized we're gonna do all the things. We're gonna uncover all of these different things. We're gonna because Star Trek, we've got warp drive in the Federation, but we don't actually have a cell phone and we don't have AI. We don't have they don't have the internet the way we do. Well, they're gonna have. Imagine all of those things expanding. Imagine humans existing both simultaneously in a physical world and a virtual world, communicating with each other over the internet while also interacting with the world around them simultaneously. Um, how we're actually going to evolve humans into next level humans that can think faster, that can multitask. So I wrote a future where all of those things happen. Um, and that also caused everything to balloon as well as I went through
Wow.
all of that.
So, what's the writing? Because I mean, you spend time with Jill helping other writers. How do you
Mhm.
divide up your day in terms of the Mallory sits down to write versus the Mallory who researches versus the Mallory who helps other writers?
Yeah, so I what happened to me around in 2020 is I got COVID a couple times and I started to burn out as well because I at that point I had written even though I started in '07, I didn't write that many books until 2016 when I started to do really well. And then I wrote over 100 books in 4 years.
Wow.
Um, and so unsurprisingly, I kind of burnt myself out a bit. So actually being able to teach other authors how to sell their books came at a really good time. I was actually thinking about getting a day job again because I just couldn't manage to get the books out. I was still making six figures, but I'm like, okay, this is going to wane. And
Yeah.
maybe I should go get a day job. And I mentioned it to a bunch of author friends, and they're like, "Are you crazy? Even what you consider to be a waning career is still like huge goals for most authors. Um, why don't you teach people how to do what you did?" And so I did that, and I had enough books, and I know ads really well that I actually was able to maintain also a six-figure career over the past 5 years without releasing any books.
Yeah.
Um, so I was able to do that and also teach other authors. So that kind of kept me going for about 3 years. And then I started getting back into writing, but it's really hard to switch from analytical work to creative work. So for the longest time, I had to write first thing in the morning. If I started analyzing ads and whatnot, then I wasn't going to manage to do it. Um, but the problem was that a lot of times I'd wake up in the morning thinking about all the ads accounts I had to look at for clients, and I would just do that first thing, and then I wouldn't be able to write.
Yeah.
Only like in the last year or so have I gotten really good at actually doing analytical work in the morning and then actually writing and being creative in the afternoon. But the
Wow.
thing that like finally made it work for me was realizing like, hey, if I get all of the work out of the way that's like weighing on my mind, then I could be, open and free to actually do the writing and not have to worry about, different ad accounts or what I should be looking at here or there. Just like I can put it all on my mind and write, and it's working really well. So for the first time since 2021, I have a pre-order up on Amazon for another book.
Wow. Like
It's
I
been,
didn't know it had been that long.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's been a stretch.
Wow, that is amazing. But let's go back to the beginning. So you said it was roughly 2016 is when you started after doing the research and the notes and all that. At what point did you know that maybe looked at your dashboard, looked at the reads, looked at the sales and went, "All right, this is it. Like I'm in. I'm in, baby."
So yeah, so I published the first book on Amazon because I tried going TradPub for a while in 2012, and I did 4 books until November 2016. Is all I put out, and
Yeah.
like in August of 2016, we started to actually I released the third book in July of 20, I think July or June of 2016, and I actually started to get some momentum. And Jill and I really started to figure out, mostly Jill originally actually figured out Facebook ads. And I had a very well-paying software development job. So we were just throwing $3,000 a month of Facebook ads. Um, and we were at Disney, um, and we realized that we were making more money a week hanging out at Disney than I made a month at my software development job. And
Wow.
this, I think, was in October of 2016. And we're like, why would I go back to work? This is crazy. But then I'm like, okay, I've only actually been making money at this for like 3 or 4 months. Perhaps I shouldn't quit my job and do it. But then I released book 4 in November 2016 and made $25,000 that month. So I gave my boss my notice at the end of November. And so about 4 really solid months of writing income in, I quit, being a software developer and became a full-time author.
Wow.
Just went for it.
Um, and so that was how many books in was that? Six, seven?
That was at 4. I was four
Oh, that
books in.
that was the fourth. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
That was
yeah. It
book
took me
four
till
then. Okay. Wow.
took me till April to get my 5th book out.
Wow.
Making
Okay.
that jump from software developer to full-time author is actually really hard.
Oh, I can only imagine. Yeah.
So yeah, so it took me like 4 months to write the next book.
Yeah. And then you've kind of picked up a pattern or a process
Yep.
that worked
Yeah, I
really.
just started to hone the process. I started to get a lot better at understanding the structure of books rather than just sort of like feeling it out as I went along. Understanding things like, oh, I'm going to have a scene on the bridge of a starship and there's going to be a fight later on or something like that. That means I need to sort of dole out very carefully as the scene opens who's there and where they are so that when the fight breaks out, the reader has a good picture in their head and I don't have to do a bunch of slow down the action, do a bunch of explanation or go back and add it in. And I got better and better at just knowing all of that stuff right at the beginning. I mean, writing 100 books kind of helps with that. Hopefully you get better at it doing that. And I got to the point where I could write like 10 to 14,000 words a day every
Wow.
day. So once I kind of got to that point, I
10
could
to
really pump out the book.
14,000 words a day. So do you like 20-minute sprints or how do you break
I
that up?
do that at that point, I was just a crazy person. I would get up at like 8 or 9 in the morning and I would write until I passed out.
Oh,
So
okay.
to do that many words, I was writing for like 16 to 18 hours a day,
Just nonstop, just
pretty
going. And
much.
then maybe
Yeah.
someone says, "Hey, here's a sandwich."
Basically, yeah. Jill and I talked about it in advance too, and I said like I'm like rolling. What if we just spent a year where I wrote as many books as I can, and you just sort of like put me in this protective bubble to allow me to do it. So we did. We agreed to do it before I just sort of like pieced out and did this.
Mhm.
And I did spend time with Jill and Eva every day as well. So I probably actually only wrote for about 14 to 16 hours a day.
Oh my,
Um,
yeah.
so I spent like 2 or 3 hours a day with Jill and Eva. But yeah, it was quite the production. And I would like I was at a point where in 2018 I did 43 books. Because everything just sort of the stars aligned and everything. And I released my books on a Thursday. And I would then put them into a Kindle countdown deal for Sunday through Wednesday. And then the next Thursday another book would come out. And my reader, I remember the first time, like I think I did like a book every Thursday for it was probably about 20 weeks. And when I missed the first Thursday, my readers were like, "What happened? Where's the next book?
Yeah.
What do you mean there's no book this Thursday? What am I going to do?" It was pretty wild. It's like, relax, folks. Like you could go out and touch grass or something, surely. I mean, I was one to talk, but um, and I also like booked out my editors. I had two editors running simultaneously at that point. I
Right.
booked them out in advance so they knew what books they were going to get when. My covers were all done like 3 to 4 months in advance. So that was all up on Amazon. So I sort of had like a production system where everything
Wow.
just sort of happened.
That's amazing. So the fans, like, do you must have an author newsletter, reach out to
Mhm.
them on a what sort of schedule do you have for that?
So since I haven't been publishing that much lately, I haven't been doing it too much. At my peak, I was sending out two newsletters a week.
Two a
Um,
week. Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
I would do one in release and then on Thursday, and then I would do one on the Sunday sale.
Okay.
And Sundays have the best open rate. So
Right.
Sunday evening, Monday morning has the best open rate
How have
for
you, as you've slowed down some of that writing, how have you managed the fan base? Because I can imagine you can get some angry people going, "What the hell, man? I have like these books, and I want more." So I used to be able to get them really fast, and now I have to wait. Like
I've
that
I've
must have been
had
a challenge, right?
I've had some people that are pretty grouchy actually, and like what did MD Cooper die? Like what's going on here? I'm like, I'm not dead. I'm just working on it. Not working on being dead. Obviously, never
Yeah,
mind.
yeah. Well, we all
Um,
are working on being dead
yes,
eventually, right?
I was trying not to be
I
too
just learned
morbid.
we're all going to die. I just found that out this week, actually.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank God a senator told us that. We wouldn't have known otherwise. Um, but yeah, I did it all myself. Like I've actually never used a PA. I sent all my own newsletters. I have a Discord group. I have a Facebook group, and then I have my newsletter, and
Wow.
that's where all of my interaction with my readers happens. And
Oh,
it's been pretty cool. Like it's actually been really wild. There's readers. When I made my Patreon back in like 2017, someone's like, make a really high one because some people will just do it. And like my really high Patreon level is basically like you don't get anything else. It's just to give me more money if you
yeah.
really love me and want to support me. I've had two people that have been at $50 a month on Patreon for 8 years.
Just because they want to make sure
They
that
just
you're
want, and
still
they
writing.
didn't stop when I stopped publishing. They just kept their subscription going. So
Because they want more MD Cooper, don't
they
they?
want more MD Cooper, and they're like, hey, if I keep paying you, maybe eventually you'll like get off your ass and write some more books or something. Um, so yeah,
Wow.
so I mean, I got some amazing fans. I really did. They're like really great, and they've actually been really supportive this whole time, like just sort of encouraging me to keep going. And
Wow.
you know, they'll oftentimes post about how it's time for a reread, and they'll reread like 120 books,
Wow.
which
Yeah,
takes them like a year a lot of the time to do that.
it's
So
amazing.
it's pretty wild.
So, for anyone who's listening who's intrigued by your science and the science fiction and the military and the battles and the things you've talked about, where would you recommend that a reader should start?
Well, they can go to aeon14.com. So it's AEON 14,
Okay.
14.com. And there's actually a menu item that says where to start. And it has a quiz. And you actually go through the quiz, and it'll be things like, if you had to pick a Star Trek captain, which one would it be? And you like choose your Star Trek captain. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, Star Trek's not on TV, and neither is Star Wars. I'm going to watch Firefly, Battlestar Galactica, whatever. People pick these things, and I just give them the best place to start based on what they select.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I have a lot of sci-fi stories. Like I always say to people, like, do you want like swashbuckling pirates in space, or do you want like Captain Kirk on the bridge of the Enterprise kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I've got stuff for everybody, so I kind of get them in where they want to read, and then they'll flow out into the rest of it.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. Thank you for that. And so, as we get close to wrapping up,
Mhm.
what's one bit of advice that you would love to share to other writers that you feel is probably not advice that is, like you hear the tropes of advice,
Mhm.
but there's some of your favorite advice that you'd love to share.
Immerse yourself in the sorts of stories that you want to write, except for when you're writing. Otherwise, other authors' voices will come in. Don't edit and just write to the end. That's
Okay.
that's that's my. I mean, it obviously doesn't work for everybody, but there's like a power that comes from getting to the end, writing those words at the end, and be like, I did it. I wrote the book. I finished this thing, and you can go back and edit it later. You can't edit a blank page, so get the words in the page. You can edit it later, and just get them down. Get that sense of accomplishment, the notch in your belt that you actually are able to do it. You wrote the whole book. I think there's nothing more empowering than that for authors.
That is awesome. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, Mal. Last
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
Where can my listeners find out more about you?
Well, that'd be the site I mentioned, aeon14.com. All of my books are there. And you can also, if you're interested in the work that my wife and I do helping authors, that's at thewritingwives.com.
Awesome. Thanks again for hanging out with me.
That was a blast.
So 2 things that I want to reflect on is Mal talked about leaving full-time work as a software developer because the writing was going well. It was starting to make really good money and better money than she was making as a software developer. But that once she did that change was hard, and it took 5 months to get that next book done. And it's so funny, as I was listening back to this conversation, I remember experiencing that myself. Like Mel talked about that jump to full-time author and how difficult it was. I had been writing for a lot longer, over 40 years now. And it wasn't until roughly 2017 that I was starting to earn a decent amount of money. Nowhere near as much as Mal is making. Again, my own writing is mid 5 figures, but it was enough money considering my partner's benefits and all the other things that I didn't need to work full time anymore. And so in 2017 was when that was starting to happen for me consistently, and I could leave full time work, and I did, and I left Kobo at the end of 2017, and it took me a while to get into the groove. I didn't know what to do with all the extra time on my hand. I struggled for years because I was working 60-hour weeks, and I struggled to find time to write. And I thought, well, now I have all the time in the world. But that, for me, as somebody who works to deadline, was a huge challenge and a huge problem, because having all that time screwed me up. I had all the time in the world, so I didn't make writing a priority. I experimented with some things, but it really took me a few years to get my groove, to start. It wasn't really till 2020, actually, that things started to take hold. Now, I did start to do some projects, and it honestly wasn't until about a year later when I started working part-time for Draft to Digital that was kind of like the magic thing for me, for 2 reasons. I had something to focus on for about 20 hours of my week that was committed to another company and committed to an amazing team I got to work with. I'm technically not an employee, but they treat me like an employee. So it was technically like having a job, but not a job that took 60 hours a week. It was 20 hours a week. And some weeks it's 10 hours, and other weeks it's 40 hours, but it all balances out in the end. And there's such autonomy, and it's been a great place to work. But having that really allowed me the ability, or it took away enough of my time that I was able to focus better. And then it was starting at the end of 2018. So 2019, 2020, that's when things started to really work for me in terms of balancing my work or writing schedule. Now, I'm still not good at it, but I've done a decent enough job that I've produced significantly more books since 2018 till 2025 than I did in the preceding many, many years that I had been writing. So that's the first thing I wanted to focus on. And the lesson there, or the reflection there for us as writers, is we sometimes think that it's going to be, if I can leave this job and I can write full time, that's going to make all the difference. Well, careful what you wish for, because sometimes it's not as easy as you might first suspect. And Mal experienced that, and I experienced that, and I'm sure that there are other authors who've experienced that. So cut yourself some slack. Give yourself some time to learn and grow and adapt as well. Now, the other thing I wanted to reflect on was Mal was talking about Patreon and not having done fiction for several years, but having 2 supporters who offered $50 a month. They didn't have to pay that high, but they offered it because they just wanted to get M.D. Cooper books out and wanted to support M.D. Cooper, their favorite author in the world, offering them $50 a month for 8 years just to support Mal. And I've seen that with patrons and people who've moved from Patreon over to Buy Me a Coffee, where they didn't want to have a monthly section, so they dropped a crap ton of money on me. I'm talking to you, Nikki. who just really wanted to support it. And I know several of my listeners and supporters, even if they don't get a chance to listen to every episode, I do have some regular long-term Patreon supporters who do that $5 a month, not for any other reason than just wanting to show their support for me. And I truly value that, and I love that. And that's a reminder of, in general for us, the reflection there is the things you create, whether it's the fiction you create or the articles you write or whatever it is that you're creating, the art, the music, anything that you're creating, there's probably other people that are going to find value in it. And it's not a tit for tat thing where they're going to pay for whatever, like for products that you produce or whatever, but it lends more to it lends more to warming my heart. I love so much that there were a few people who were basically, combined giving Malorie $100 a month for 8 years, just as a show of ongoing support. And that kind of thing makes me feel that there's goodness and there's positivity in the universe, because chances are, for the work that you create, there are those people who care that much that will want to support you in those ways. And I love that so much. It warms my heart beautifully. It warms my heart that there are people who do a similar thing with this podcast. But remember that there are probably those people out there who value the things that you create and the fact that you're creating, and they want to encourage you and support you. That's fantastic. Now, here's the thing. You might not have met those people yet, or those people might not have been lucky enough to discover you yet. But if you stop, chances are they may not be able to discover you. They won't have that opportunity. So again, I'm of the mind of continue to create those works that you are passionate about, and chances are you're going to connect with some kindred spirits out in the world who need the things that you create. So please don't give up. I don't want you to give up on you. I don't want anyone to give up on you. Well, that's it for this reflection. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Mal Cooper. Now, we had this conversation, and I was so inspired because I remember thinking, like, every time I talk to Mal, I always try to pump Mal for information about Facebook ads and stuff like that. And this was just a really fun conversation, talking about the stories and the storytelling and the maps and the creativity and the insights of Mal that I got a chance to hear while we were having drinks and dinner that long, beautiful afternoon in New Brunswick. But I wanted to bring that to you guys so you guys could experience that passion. But something else, when I was talking to Mal, we finished the interview, and I wanted to talk to Mal about Mal's reasons for moving to Canada. I kept forgetting, oh yeah, Mal was born in Canada and then moved to the States, and Jill and Mal were living in Boston. But I'm putting in an extra episode of the podcast because it's about a 15, maybe 18-minute interview. Mal and I had a conversation about being genderqueer, about Mal's lifestyle, about Mal realizing she was a woman and had not been treated that way her entire life, and coming out as, transgender, and the challenges that had in her personal life with friends and with fans, and the pushback that Mal experienced, but also this unique experience Mal had of having walked around as, labeled a cisgender white male, and then becoming a woman, and the differences of what that meant, not just in terms of mansplaining, but in terms of other elements of safety, and things I don't think about as a cisgender heterosexual white male, middle class, 6'3". It's a fascinating conversation, and I know you're going to enjoy it. And so that episode will be coming out before next Friday's episode. So sometime in between, I'm going to get that edited and get that out the door so you can benefit from that secondary conversation with Mal. So Until next episode, which is coming up less than a week from today, or when I actually release this, because if you're listening to this in the future, that time makes no sense because you can binge listen to them all. But until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.